I'm going to share with people what the Word has to say about our involvement with the Church of Jesus. I always like to make sure that they understand that our involvement in His church is not something that is done simply out of duty, something that I don't really like, that I don't really gain something from, and I just have to do because His Word says so. But actually, there are tremendous benefits to each of us for our meaningful participation in the life of His church. There's a reason that you benefit from being here this morning at Vibe, from learning from His Word, from participating on a weekly basis, getting to know one another, practicing as a part of this community, being engaged in what's unfolding with what Jesus is doing here at Avalon and through Vibe here in our community. I want to take just a couple of minutes today to talk about what those benefits are and why it is that it's so critical for your own needs and not just out of some kind of obedience, some kind of obligation, some kind of duty that you be here. And the first one is simply this, that being a part of His body, being a part of His church, being a part of His people gives us or provides a context in which I can love and be loved. You see, we were made to be loved. We were made to be valued. We were made to love others. And one of the beautiful things about following after Jesus is that we get to express His love to other people as well. And the church provides a meaningful context in which that can happen. The church provides a place and a group of people who relate to one another with a certain quality of relationship and a certain kind of relationship that enables them to be cared for in difficult times, that enables them to encourage one another through the challenging times, that enables them to rejoice together and to cry together, to weep together, whatever else needs to be done. There is a certain interdependence in the community of His people that's expressed in the church that is important for each of us, that meets a need that each of us has. And Paul's trying to describe that when he talks about this illustration or this metaphor of the body, that each of the parts depend on each other, and they find fullest expression of their purpose by the contributions that others also make. And Paul says there's such an interdependence there among the different parts of the body that what happens to one impacts them all. He talks about when one part suffers, the whole part suffers with it. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. Verse 26, if one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. So there's this sense of interdependence among the different parts of the body that enable them to be supported and encouraged and helped. And Paul wants us to understand that being a part of Jesus' church provides us a setting and a people where we can show His love to others and we can experience that love back, where we can care for one another in difficult times, when we can suffer with one another in some of those times that we go through. And some of you can think about some of those experiences we've even been having together over the last several weeks as our church has come around. A couple of the families in our church who have been walking through difficult times. Our brother Carl, kind of near the point of death, and a church family that has wrapped their arms around others and helped to care for them, who has done tangible, practical things to help them with their needs, cleaned their house, helped to care, done laundry, helped to provide food, whatever the case may be, caring for one another, loving one another. There is an encouragement and a support, and there is a strength that comes by all of those parts coming together and helping one another, showing love for one another. Jesus said, in fact, that was one of the ways that the world would know that we were His disciples, that we belonged to Him, is that we would show love to one another. And that phrase, one another, is one of those phrases that the New Testament uses to help capture that picture of the context of community among God's people that is practiced in the life of His church. And we catch that here as well. And so gathering together with the people of the church enables us to build the kind of relationships of a depth and quality that enable us to truly love one another and to be loved by one another. And coming together on a morning like this is to bring those people together in one place and to begin to build those kind of relationships and practice that. And for that reason, the writer of the book of Hebrews, for example, in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25, says, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Being a participating part of the church is critical to our spiritual health because it provides a context in which I can love others and be loved. We might also add that being a participating part of the church is critical to our spiritual health because it also provides a context in which I can learn God's truth from His Word. Now, some would say to me, well, Pastor Keith, I can study the Bible on my own. I don't need His church to study my Bible. And I would certainly say, well, that's true, and I hope you're studying His Word, and I hope on your own, and I hope you're doing that on a daily basis and coming to know His truth in a more complete sort of way. But I would also suggest that there are limitations to what any of us can learn just studying on our own. But there's tremendous benefit when we come together with others and we're learning under good teaching, and we're benefiting from the perspectives that others bring and the questions that others bring and the direction that others bring. That being a part of a group who study that Word together, whether it's in a classroom setting or being a part where I can sit of a church body where I can sit under the teaching of someone else who can help me understand God's Word with a freshness of insight and a perspective that I might not have had on my own, is of tremendous benefit to all of us. And while it's true that any of us can study on our own, we benefit greatly from studying together. The people of the early church understood that. They got that. They learned from each other and gathered together to study and pray. We kind of catch a snapshot of that in Acts chapter 2, in one of those passages that just kind of captures a summary of what life was like in the early church. And we read there that they being the people of the church, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common, selling their possessions and goods they gave to anyone as he had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes, and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So we get this snapshot of life in the early church, and we get kind of actually this combination of that factor of the interdependence and relationships of love and friendship and community that were a part of that, kind of put together with this devotion to the apostles' teaching, learning from those who had gone before and from those who had walked with Jesus, and learning more of what it meant for them to walk with Jesus as well. That's why you're here this morning. And that's why your presence here this morning is important. Not just this morning, but any given week. When you come and you learn from the Word as we try to present the truth of God's teaching in this setting. And then you become a part in relationship with some of those others who are here as well. And perhaps you're part of a small group or a Bible study or some other expression where you gain from the knowledge and the truth and the insight that others have of God's Word as well. It's tremendous benefit. In fact, I'd go beyond that and say it's critical to your spiritual health. But thirdly, I would also add that being a participating part of the church is critical to our spiritual health because it provides a context in which I can serve in God's mission to the world. It is certainly true that you can be a witness, and you should be a witness on your own to whoever might cross your path, whether that's a neighbor in your neighborhood or a coworker at work or a fellow student at school or someone in your family or extended family who doesn't yet know Jesus. But one of the things that we seek to do in the life of the church is to organize God's people in an intentional sort of way for their involvement in being a part of sharing that witness to our community, of being that presence. Again, mindful of the fact that Jesus said that our relationships together, our love for one another, would be that element that confirmed for people that we belong to Him. But imagine what it's like when God's people come together and they organize themselves, they mobilize themselves to be a combined witness in a community or in a city or in a portion of the world. Even in the last week, three families or representatives of families, 4 of our people from here at Avalon have been in different countries, in different parts of the world, sharing that witness. Again, as an expression of a broader part of the church, supported by some of the gifts that you have given to make that possible. And so again, we're a part of that effort. We mobilize God's people and organize God's people for the purpose of mission And that gives us a greater and even more effective voice than any of us individually would have. There is a synergy that comes when God's people come together and in an intentional, mobilized way, seek to be the witness that God put us here to be. So in summary, being a part of Christ's church is critical for your spiritual health because it gives you a place where you can experience God's grace. The grace of Christ in His work in your heart, but also the grace of Jesus that is lived out in those one another's that we practice with each other, the loving one another and encouraging one another and supporting one another and lifting one another up and loving one another and meeting with one another. All of those things become an experience of His grace lived out in the community of His people, His body. Secondly, it's important because it puts you in touch with His Word. You become equipped as one of His disciples by learning more of His truth and what it means to follow Him as His Word is given greater insight, not simply by the inspiration of His Spirit, but also by the freshness of the perspectives that His people bring to that moment. And then finally, He enables you to be a part of an intentional, mobilized effort to engage our world on behalf of Christ, on behalf of that witness for Him. And you and I get to be a part of that kind of enhanced or more effective witness. I remember a moment of discovery for me about that sense of interdependence with the people of Jesus Church. It was actually when I was leaving as an associate pastor at my first appointment in ministry after seminary. I was moving on to help plant a church actually in Wells County, south of Fort Wayne here. And the church in Lafayette, where I was serving as an associate, held kind of a going away dinner on the last Sunday that we were there. And several people shared some memories of our time there. We had this dinner together and it was special. And I had kind of been treating this transition in my life and ministry to that point as simply kind of moving from one job to another. And there's a sense in which that was true. But then at the conclusion of this dinner on our last Sunday there, people asked me to get up and share a few words of memory and maybe some comments about our time there and kind of this next step in transition in our lives. And I got up, and if you know me well, you know I'm not really prone to kind of intense emotional expression. I feel emotions, but often do not express that in a real visible sort of way. But I got choked up, and tears began to come down the side of my face. Because when I looked out on what I had thought was just a crowd of people at a church where I serve, I couldn't help but realize that that wasn't the case at all. These were people into whose lives I had gotten connected because of our engagement together, our interdependence in community as a church, that it wasn't simply something you walk away from. It wasn't just like employees at a job, but we were bound together in a unique sort of way. I could look over there and I could see a Betty Ray, whom I had to tell that her grown son had committed suicide one night, and to weep with her and pray with her in the midst of that very, very difficult moment of grief. And I could see a Roger Swift over here with whom I had spent several days in the Boundary Waters Wilderness, Canoe Area Wilderness of northern Minnesota, camping and talking about life together and just building the depth of friendship. And I could go on down and mention several of those other folks that I looked out on and had those memories of these very important personal times that we had shared together. And I realized that being a part of the church was not just having a place where I showed up on Sunday morning for an hour, but it was becoming a part of a people, becoming a part of something that was so much bigger than myself. And I discovered that also brought an element of love and care that I so desperately needed. Friends, if you believe in Jesus, and if you're a follower of His, then you're a part of something much bigger than yourself, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. But I would challenge you to make sure that you're a deeply involved part, because it's critical. It's critical to your spiritual health and to mine.